Those of you who know me well know that I love sailing. I love sailboats. I love being out on the water. I love stories about the sea. I also love movies, and one of my favorites combines the two. It's an older movie that didn't do well in the box office, but in particular speaks to me. It's called Wind. It's the story of a talented sailor whose talent is recognized early and is given the opportunity to compete in an America's Cup race. For complicated reasons, his boat loses, and he gets the blame. As the first American sailboat at the time to lose the coveted cup, he, his captain, and the rest of the crew are all in shame. After wrangling with depression and guilt, he comes to the conclusion that the only thing greater than winning the cup is losing it and coming back to win it again. As Americans, we all love winners, but we especially love great comebacks. A sports star who's shown promise or even greatness in the past has come on hard times, and then he comes back to win the great prize. An entertainer, brilliant in their early career, who's failed to carry that success forward, but who finds a great role later in their career. A politician who early in their career captures the hearts of those they lead, but who becomes tempted by the allure of power and corrupted by trying to keep it, falls out of favor, and gains prominence and regains his idealism and respect in some overwhelming crisis. All this is the stuff of American heroes. We come by it rightly. It's part of our Christian heritage. In today's gospel, Jesus teaches two lessons which might seem at first to have little to do with one another. His first story establishes in the minds of his audience the basis for the real lesson of the second. His audience told him first of Jews who were slaughtered violently and unjustly by Roman authorities while offering sacrifice at the temple. Jesus' audience asked him what he thought of this. He responded in a classically prophetic way. He used this question to teach people about God's justice and about God's mercy. In teaching them, he brought up another instance of apparently innocent people who died in a seemingly random event. He asked the crowd if he thought that these were worse sinners than others who lived in Jerusalem. He answered his own question by telling the crowd they were not. Jewish tradition taught that God's justice was immediate and present in this world, that those who greatly transgressed were punished in the here and now. And so when some great evil befell a person, someone who seemed outwardly innocent, Jews sought to know what wrong that person had done, that God would punish them in this way. In Jesus' second parable, he told the crowd a story which was intended to show the dynamic tension that exists in our world between God's justice and God's mercy. He told of a landowner who planted a fig tree, had it tended, and who, after the appropriate time, was very disappointed to find that it yielded no fruit. The tree consumed the resources provided by the landowner, who, in fairness, should expect a return on his investment. The landowner decided that his outlay was in vain and instructed his gardener to cut the tree down so that further resources are not wasted and that they could be used in more productive ways. The Jews who heard this parable would have recognized in the landowner the God of their tradition, whose primary characteristic was his justice. But Jesus added a new element to this parable. The gardener responded to the landowner and begged for additional tolerance. He asked that he be allowed to intervene, cultivate the tree, and add fertilizer. This was something new for the Jews who had heard Jesus' preaching. This was Jesus' new covenant, being offered by the Son of God. In that person, he was introducing them to God's unbounded mercy. Jesus' response to the crowd, and a primary tenet of this new covenant, was that God's ways don't often conform to man's ideas. Jesus taught that misfortune suffered in this world isn't a product necessarily of God's wrath for sinners. Sometimes it's the result of God's gift of free will to all, such as giving free will to Pilate to pursue his heavy-handed ways. That gift allows us the freedom to determine our own direction in life. But sometimes it can also allow humans to do appalling things to each other, and God won't interfere. Sometimes misfortune is simply the unfathomable way in which the universe God created works. But Jesus' lesson to the crowd was that through him, God's infinite justice is balanced by his eternal mercy. But there's a practical limit to God's mercy. We only have this one short life in which to bear fruit of his investment in us. In Lent, we take the time to reflect, to review, and to reform. We take time to assess whether we have borne productive fruit and whether God would be pleased with his garden. Lent is the time to reform if our reflection shows that our lives fall short of his expectation. Christ has given us the means. His words have fertilized and cultivated our understanding of God's wishes for us. He is the gardener, interceding with the Father on our behalf. Think on this parable of the fruitless fig today. If your conscience tells you that it applies to you, remember also that Christ is interceding for you. He has obtained for you a moratorium, a period in which you can prove yourself fruitful. Use the gift of God with gratitude, and you shall obtain for yourself the result that God wants. Americans love a great comeback, and as human beings, we inevitably fall short of what God expects of us. It's in our human nature to be imperfect, to fall into sin. In Lent, we as Christians have the opportunity to come back, the chance to secure the great prize of salvation that may have slipped from our grasp in the past, with challenges, distractions, and temptations in our busy lives. We have a chance to come back to God, to bear the fruit that he expects in his garden. We are reminded on Ash Wednesday at the beginning of Lent that we have come from nothing, that our physical being will return to nothingness. This Sunday marks the halfway point in our Lenten time of reflection on what we have accomplished. Have we borne fruit? Have we used our brief time wisely, or are we in need of a comeback? Lent is the time, and Jesus is the way.